Hi, this is Nora Flum at Totally Got Out of Bed. I wanted to let you know we recorded episode 2 as originally just one big long episode. It was almost 40 minutes long, and we decided later that we're going to divide it into two. So we've got a part 1 and a part 2 for a couple of reasons. One, because it was really long and we were hoping to keep everything under 20 minutes, or right around 20 minutes. And two, because we did exactly one of the things that I said later on that bothered me. We told you all in detail about the tragedy. So it might be a little difficult to listen to. So, if you prefer, please go ahead and skip to part 2. If you don't want to hear the details of the tragedy leading up to and right around, we covered in detail some of the things that we went through. We kind of do a recap and a summary and what we learned during part 2. So with that, we will go ahead and start part 1 of this episode, and again, feel free to skip this part and go straight to part 2.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Totally Got Out of Bed, a podcast for people who, in spite of everything, have managed or tried their best to totally get out of bed. We get it. We've been there. We've survived the loss of a loved one to suicide. I'm Tony Plant, and I lost my daughter Anna on January 30th of 2016.
And I'm Nora Flum, and I lost my son Eric on January 3rd of 2018. Now, Tony said good afternoon, but we are perfectly aware that this might be morning, this might be the middle of the night. If your sleeping schedule is like ours was and is still sometimes, it could be 2 o'clock in the morning when you're listening to us right now. We are very sorry you're here. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to say to any listeners out there, if you are listening because you have lost someone to suicide, welcome to the club, and we're very sorry you're here. Our goal for this time together is just to share our stories in the hopes that what we have experienced makes you feel like you're not alone. Suicide loss is terribly isolating, and being in the room with someone else who's experienced it, I think, helps. Tony and I first met at a support group for survivors of suicide loss. It's a hard group to belong to, and hearing everyone else's stories is incredibly difficult, and we know more than one family who has just not been able to come back because they can't face hearing the stories. My standard saying is that I don't feel better when I go to group, but I feel worse when I don't. I'm not sure that our episodes or that our podcast can make you feel better, but I hope they at least help you know that you are not alone. Our purpose for this week's episode is to tell you our stories in more detail and share what helped us get through those first few days. And now, after a few years, what we remember as we look back on those first terrible moments. Hopefully, you can find some tools for your grief toolbox that help you make it through.
Thanks, Nora. So, we're just going to tell our stories and at the end, hopefully give you some information or, like Nora said, just some ways that you can get through or that work for us. I guess, it's kind of not necessarily work for everybody, but ways that worked for us. So I will start with, once again, the day that Anna died was and still is absolutely surreal. As you recall, she was 15 years old, and I was kind of having a discussion with her that afternoon. It was a discussion about where we were going to go on spring break. It was kind of an argument, but not really an argument, just a kind of heated discussion because she had her ideas and she was 15, so we didn't always agree, so I really didn't think much about it. I asked her if she wanted to join me on a walk. I was walking the dogs, which I did basically every Saturday. It was a Saturday afternoon. She didn't want to. I told her I'd be back in 15 minutes and that when I got home, we would go to church, go out to dinner. I frequently bribed them with going out for dinner after they would go to church with me. And so I left, and I was gone for 15 minutes, and when I got back, she was already dead. There was no note. I found her and I started screaming. I was the only one home. I called my husband, Anna's dad. I called my sister, don't ask me why, because I knew she was at church already. And I knew she wouldn't answer, but I called her anyway. I called 911. The operator kept me on the phone until the paramedics got to our house, but the paramedics got lost, and so they were gone a little extra time, and of course I was totally panicked, out of control, not knowing what to do. And then the lady on the phone told me that I needed to start CPR, and so I did. And then when they got there, they took over the CPR. They took her by ambulance to Hennepin County Medical Center, and we followed. And we cried, of course, and people started arriving at the hospital almost right away. Our families, our friends, Anna's friends, Leo's friends. Then a little later, Leo came. He had been on a high school choir trip and got home late.
Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt. You should say that Leo is your other son, Anna's brother.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
So Leo, my other son, Anna's brother, got home and came down. His friends came. The high school principal came. Our pastor came. We were posting on social media, pray for a miracle. After a very long night with very little sleep, we spoke to the ICU doctor, who told us that the chances of her surviving were basically none. So on Sunday morning, January 31st, we made the excruciating decision to remove her from life support. The Minnetonka High School choir gathered at our church at noon that day, and they sang the choral benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Amen. They recorded it and they sent us the video. We played it for Anna while we all stood around her, and we removed her from life support. And then we left. We left our daughter forever. People followed us home, and people just kept coming over. It was like an 8-hour open house. Someone brought trays and trays of food, and someone brought beverages. So many people came. I can't even tell you how many, maybe 50, maybe 100, probably more, like somewhere in between. And we just cried and talked and cried. And people were just so nice.
Oh, God, yeah.
They are just so nice. We just kind of walked around in a daze, and I don't really remember it much, except for all the people and how nice they were. The following day, my family came over, and they brought food, and they brought computers and photos, and we started planning a funeral. Both the pastor and the music director from our church came over during those first few days, so we didn't have to go anywhere, because people are so nice. People would ask what they could do for us. All I knew is what I wanted was people around us. Lots of people, as many people as possible, because I knew that if I was alone, I wouldn't make it. I would break down and sob uncontrollably, and I didn't want that. I remember feeling like I had to stay focused in order to plan a funeral that would be worthy of my daughter. We needed to provide her with a proper goodbye. Anna died on a Sunday morning. The visitation was on Thursday, and the funeral was on Friday. On about Tuesday, I decided I needed to speak at the funeral. I knew it would be hard. I also knew that I probably knew her the best of anyone, and that in order to give her that proper goodbye, I needed to speak. It wasn't really a talk as much as it was a reading. I couldn't actually maintain a train of thought, but I could read, and so I did. I don't know how, I just did. The funeral was beautiful. We had glorious music. For Good from Wicked, Time to Say Goodbye, Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, and I'll Fly Away, all performed by people we know and love. These were their gifts to us because, people are so nice. There were almost 700 people at the funeral, and there were almost 1,000 the night before at the visitation. It was exhausting. We were so tired, so completely grief stricken, and so extremely heartbroken. But we still asked people to come over after the funeral because we didn't want to be alone and we didn't want it to end. We knew when it was over, she would officially be gone. I don't know how late the event went at our house. I think I probably laid down prior to everyone leaving.
Oh, Tony, listening to your story brings back so much, and I'm having a hard time now not tearing up. And I know that I've heard the story before, but it's just hearing it in such excruciating detail. So thank you for sharing what you experienced. Um, I'm Nora, and I lost my son Eric on January 3rd of 2018. Um, so first, some background on Eric. He was 25 years old when he died. He was making the transition between jobs. He was about to ready to start a new job with a company that he had been wanting to work for years. He was thrilled. He was excited. He had just been home for Christmas, and we had had a wonderful Christmas time together. We had lots of cooking together, lots of playing cards and playing games. Um, we had just been turned on to the game Catan, Settlers of Catan, or Catan, however you pronounce it. And so we were on a wild hunt to look for the board game. We didn't have it, and we wanted it, and so we were looking everywhere for it, and we couldn't find it anywhere. Um, Christmas Eve service, Eric was a flute player, and he accompanied the choir with his flute and was making plans to do it again the following year. He was very very kind, very talented. He had no history of mental health issues that we were aware of. His friends didn't know of any history of mental health issues. I think we remember a couple of episodes of anxiety when he was under enormous stress, but that's kind of normal. He calls his parents when he's feeling anxious, and we talk to him and work with him, and no, this came completely out of the blue. Um, So I remember I took him to the airport on a Thursday, and I'm a teacher. Then I went to school after I took him to the airport and spent all day at school working on homework, getting things ready for the end of the semester because we were going to have finals when we came back from Christmas break, and getting everything ready in the grade book because I was also planning to do a mission trip with a group of 12 students and two former students who were going with me as chaperones. We were going to Guatemala to serve at a home for children who had been abandoned at Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos. Shout out to them. They do really amazing work. So my husband and I celebrated our anniversary. We got married on December 30th of 1988. So we had our 30th anniversary that night. And then the very next morning, I left very early for Guatemala with this group. Um, we were having an amazing time. The space for me was peaceful. It was holy. It was exciting to be with these girls. It was exciting to be in a different country and to serve and to work with kids. And I remember laughing and I remember crying, feeling for some reason that this was a special and unique place. And then on a terrible Wednesday, um, I had a great time with the kids that day. I remember laughing so hard and crying on the floor, laughing so hard that day. We all gathered in the evening to sit around and do our reflection and to write in our journals and to do prayer time because it was a Catholic school. I'm not Catholic, but I am a teacher at a Catholic school. So we were just having some quiet time, and I remember having some music on in the background, and the phone rang. And I dismissed it at first, and then it rang again. I got up, excused myself, got up and left the room. And it was my husband, and I could tell from the tone of his voice that something was terribly wrong. And I heard the anguish in his voice, and I knew that somebody had died, and I knew that the sound in his voice meant that it could not be anybody except one of our two children. And I knew that it was one of our kids. And he said, Eric is dead. And I don't remember much about the next few minutes. I do remember making eye contact. I was outside, and I'm making eye contact with one of the chaperones, and I gestured that he had to come here. And I told him, and I collapsed. And he grabbed me and he said, "Okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to send the girls off to their dorm, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to get you home." Um, so by the time the girls left and I got back in, there were also other counselors there who came in, and they brought me chamomile tea because people in Latin America think that chamomile tea can fix everything. And so I drank chamomile tea, and um, and Andrew and Steve got my principal on the phone, and the school bought me a ticket home for the following morning. I was up all night. I spent some time writing a letter to the girls, telling them goodbye, telling them Eric's story, and writing in the letter, remember to stop telling God how big your storm is and still start telling your storm how big your God is. I don't remember what else I put in that
I
letter.
love that.
I don't
I
remember.
love that.
Yeah. Um, I spent a lot of time on the phone with my husband. It's like I couldn't hang up. I remember making some initial phone calls, calling my sister, who called her daughter, who was the only family we had in Minneapolis. So she called her daughter, and her daughter came to be with Matt. I tried to call my brother but couldn't get through with the connection, so I called my sister back and asked her to call my brother. Um, I called some dear friends in Mexico who had known Eric since he was a baby almost. I called, um, we have two young women in our lives. One of them is our goddaughter, and the other is her sister, that were like sisters to our kids. Couldn't get a hold of the one, so I was able to get a hold of the other and asked her to call her sister. Um, so making those terrible phone calls, I remember that. Um, I remember being on the phone with Matt saying that his friend Mark had come over like a brother to him. And I remember the director of the school came to say goodbye as we were like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning getting into the pickup to go back to the airport. It's about a 2-hour drive to the airport. And he just spoke fuerza and estamos contigo. Fuerza meaning strength, and estamos contigo, which is a beautiful sentiment. Um, it means we are with you. And when there's no other words to say, estamos contigo, we are with you. I remember the car ride to the airport, reminiscing with Steve, who was my former student, one of the chaperones, and he held my hand the whole time, the 2 hours back, telling him stories about Eric. He offered to come into the airport with me, but I knew that as soon as I got through security, he wouldn't be able to do anything anyway, so I just sent him back, so I was on my own. And I remember I packed horribly and getting through customs and realizing I don't have a pen to write down my information. I'm supposed to fill out a form, and I don't have a pen. I'm a teacher who always yells at children for not having a pen, and I don't have a pen, and I couldn't find, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning, so there was hardly anybody around. And finally, I did find somebody who had a pen, and I remember the pen he had was a State Farm pen in Guatemala City. The State Farm pen, and that was a company that my sister used to work for. So it was like just somebody saying, "Yeah, we're with you. We're with you." I remember the being on the plane and feeling numb and just putting my earbuds in, not listening to anything most of the time, but just putting my earbuds in because I didn't want to talk to people. But I do remember I had video of Eric playing the flute, so I watched that video over and over again. And I also had video of one of my students who was on the trip singing Amazing Grace in Spanish with a young girl in Guatemala. It was a beautiful video. They were rehearsing. She was going to be the singer in a worship service. And it was beautiful, and it gave me strength, and it gave me peace, and it gave me calm. And I know that this is a long story, and I'm sorry for going on so long, but as I remember all of these details, maybe some of them are meaningful, and maybe some of them are not. Oh, we have another son, John. I think my husband called him to tell him. I called him as well a little bit later and talked to him, do you want us to buy you a ticket home? He was in Oklahoma. Do you want us to buy you a ticket home? And he said no, he wanted to drive. Okay. And I remember getting off the plane and melting into my husband's arms and him saying, John is on the way home. He's flying. His friends decided that it was not good for him to drive, and they pitched in and bought him a ticket home. They wouldn't let him make that decision. And I remember the first few days, as soon as I got home, Matt's brother was here. My husband's brother was here. He beat me here. They live in North Carolina. My niece was here. Friends kept coming. And my niece Tori, became sort of our rock. She was a recent college graduate, had worked for about a year in communications, and had moved back to the cities recently. So she became like our traffic director and our communications director. She was with us at all the important decisions. She was with us when we got the phone call saying that Eric's death had been ruled a suicide. It had not been clear at the beginning, and like you said, Tony, Eric didn't leave a note. And we found out later, or I found out later, that most people don't leave notes. So it was ruled a suicide. So then we had to make this decision. Do we name it? Do we claim it? Do we say right away that it was a suicide? And we decided that, yeah, it is part of the story. It is part of the honest story that we needed to tell. So we did say that we had to tell. And so we posted on social media, on Facebook, that Eric had died by suicide. And we got enormous and overwhelming support from his friends and from those that he knew. I remember that Friday, we got a phone call from a friend of his from high school who said, "I just can't stop crying." And so I said, "Come on over, we can't stop crying either." And that led us to this decision. I remember my father had died when I was 19 years old, and I remember feeling that the very worst part of grief is telling people for the first time and seeing people for the first time. That overwhelming feeling of loss. And I knew that I didn't want that first time seeing everybody to happen at the funeral, because I knew that my mind wouldn't be there and I wouldn't be well. So we decided to do an open house on that Saturday and have people over. My friend Joe came over. Joe is a counselor at our school, and he and I have been friends for a long time. And I remember what he said. He said, I can't do anything, but I can come over and sit in the shit with you. And I remember thinking, that is so right. People can't do anything for you, but they can come and sit in the shit and be there with you. So yeah, we had people over. People brought what they could. I had put out there that my husband was low on handkerchiefs, and he always carried them, so we were going to need them because we were going to be going through them quite quickly. And so people brought food, and I remember people brought clementines, cuties. We ended up with like 6 or 8 bags of cuties for some reason. I remember people bringing handkerchiefs, boxes and boxes. I remember people bringing Kleenex and toilet paper and other things and water, things that you know that you're going to go through when you got a house full of people. And I didn't know this, but my husband just told me within the last couple of days that one of his friends brought a shovel and shoveled our walk and shoveled our driveway and left the shovel with us.
Nice.
Yeah. So people are, yeah, so nice. And I just remember for those first few days not being able to be away from my husband, not being able to do anything without him, just needing to be with him constantly. Yeah. So that's my story. That gets us up. Oh, the funeral. Let me mention the funeral. Matt is a pastor, and we asked our bishop to do the service, and she was absolutely wonderful. She came and she did the service. She had lost a son, natural causes, and so she knew what it was like to be the parent who's lost a son. And her funeral was beautiful. We had 500 people there, and people from all over. My sister told me she went up to one group of Eric's friends, and she said, "Oh, are you the Chicago folk?" And they said, "No, we're California and New York," or something like that. I can't remember. So he had people from all over come to his funeral. It was a beautiful but terrible experience.
Good way to describe it. Beautiful yet terrible. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, thanks for that story, Nora. It's interesting because I've heard your story so many times too, and I think every time I hear it, I hear something new, and it's hard every time.
Yep.
It just doesn't get any easier.
With that, we're going to wrap up part 1 of episode 2. Stay tuned for part 2. We want to make sure that you guys all take care of yourselves. Please, if someone you know, or if you are feeling suicidal, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. If you need to talk, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, That's 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text HELLO to 741-741. That crisis text hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the United States. The crisis text line serves anyone in any type of crisis. Please, please, please take care of yourselves.
We'd like to thank our extremely talented team, Wendy Wolf, our tech guru, Monica Lavorsi, the composer and performer behind our theme song, Hold My Hand Now, and a special thank you to Survivor Resources, the group that continues to support us and others in the wake of our tragedies. Thanks for listening today, and please join us on the next episode, which is part 2 of episode 2, where we'll discuss the takeaways that we feel we got out of the initial death of our children. As usual, have as good a day as you can, and smile when you can, and cry if you have to.
Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now and be as one. The colors start to fade. Gray is the only shade that you see now. Lost in the charade of the journeyman's parade, can't see a way out. As you keep marching onward, oh, all you gotta do is reach out and hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now and be as one. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand. The tracks begin to sway. You're in the middle of the fray, so hold on tight now. Your grip begins to slip. You tumble towards the lip of the open train, and how? But before the world swallows you